So I'm going to hand over. Martin's going to be doing an interview and in a way to kind of hear about what it's like from both these perspectives. And we'll do this for about 20 minutes or so. So we'll just run that straight through and maybe some questions at the end of the audience, but Martin will do that now. Okay, great. I'll hand over to you, Martin.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Holly and Tracy, for being part of this interview. I guess if we can try and be as comfortable as possibly can, but just imagine we're having, a cuppa in the backyard somewhere and sort of not big focused on what's arising. It feels like a tree branch and so forth. But so the idea is to try and give a space to get a carer's perspective, but also a worker's perspective on the influence that CCSW has had on your respective lives and professions and personal life. So as a way of introduction, if we could just have you briefly introduce your context, and then we'll sort of move into talking more about your specific experiences. Tracy?
Hi, I'm Tracy. I've been a carer of, my daughter has anorexia and has had anorexia for probably 10 years.
Okay.
So.
And how old is she?
She's 23.
She's 23. Oh, okay, thank you. Holly?
So I'm Holly Laver. I'm the Clinical Coordinator of Barwon Health Eating Disorder Service, and I've more recently been working with Ross and Geneviève around the CCSW groups within Barwon Health, and also have started co-facilitating a group myself with Ross.
And when you say clinical coordinator, what's your service system there at Barwon?
So we have a specialist eating disorder service. It's an outpatient service that provides assessment and treatment for people of all ages, but we specifically have a youth sort of early intervention youth model. So we offer various psychological therapies, CBTE, cognitive analytic therapy, as well as family-based treatment. And as part of that, we have obviously the Building Hope and a family support worker through Pathways to support families.
Okay, great. Thanks, Holly. So Tracy, just to sort of start with your story in terms of as a carer, and acknowledging that your introduction to CCSW is slightly different to the carers that we've heard today, in the context that you've learnt that through a telephone coaching training program with Ross, as we've talked about before. And that, so your sort of story around using that knowledge in your own context with your daughter. So what was the context of your carer life when you got introduced to CCSW?
Before I got introduced to it, it was difficult. There was nothing for carers. You had to I felt like I was alone. There was nothing out there. We were just living. I was just living the eating disorder merry-go-round life, When I did the telephone coaching, or learned about the telephone coaching and went through the actual program that we were going to help people with, it was like a breath of fresh air. It just changed my whole perspective on how I looked at the eating disorder, how I looked at how my role as a carer, and how I could help my daughter.
Okay, and how recent was that?
I can't remember what year it was. Sorry, I lose track of years.
Okay. Right. So it's in the last couple of years.
It was maybe 2, 3 maybe 3 years ago.
Okay, so 2.5 years ago. Okay, so just trying to get a sense of the context of where that's occurred in the 10-year struggle with your daughters.
So before that, there was nothing. There was, I found a support group in Watsonia for carers, and I used to attend that before, And we all used to sit there struggling along, saying, just trying to support each other and help each other.
Yeah. And what was it about the CCSW that was useful and helpful at that time?
It took the guilt off my shoulders. It told me it was okay to mess up. The book I still use. I have it next to my bed. Sometimes I'll flip through and read. The animal metaphors were fantastic. It helped me. It made me look inwards and look at the kind of carer I was and how I could actually help her, so that anorexia wasn't in my house 24/7. There was, and I realised I was enabling her, the ways I was enabling her to continue down her path, continue being anorexic, and so it made me, again, reflect, and it helped me deal with situations. You know, she'd be in the kitchen and I'd say, you know, she'd say to me, "Oh, I look fat, don't I look fat, don't I look fat?" And I'd say, "I'm really sorry, but I can't engage in that kind of conversation with you anymore." And it empowered me to deal with her anorexia.
Can I ask what particular animal metaphor you identified with most initially?
The kangaroo.
Kangaroo.
But, you know, there were times where I changed into a different one. You know, there was times where I was the rhinoceros. I was going to fix this. I was going to get in there. We were going to sort it out. It was all going to be fantastic. And then you'd go back to the kangaroo. "Oh, it's okay, darling. I'll look after you. Yes, I'll run down the street and get what you need." You know?
Okay. And you mentioned before that reduced guilt. And so, what's sort of the experience of identifying a metaphor, an animal metaphor? What impact do you think that has, or what impact did it have on you? You think just to have an animal metaphor as opposed to the knowledge of overprotection or enmeshment, which is what the language we use as therapists.
Yeah,
I think.
well, it made me laugh. It made me laugh because there were times where I could sit back and think, "Oh my goodness, have a look at me, you know. I'm a kangaroo." Or I'd go to the support group and I'd be this mess of a jellyfish. And and I was actually started facilitating a carer support group at that stage. And we actually, I got them all to read the book. And we'd all sit around and talk about the animal metaphors we'd been that day.
Okay.
It just
lightens things up.
It does lighten things up, and it gives you, it's okay to make a mistake. It gives you the excuse to make a mistake and admit you've made a mistake and admit that, you know, you're heading down the wrong direction one day, but you can look at that and say, "Okay, I was a rhinoceros today. I really need to get back to being a dolphin or a St. Bernard."
Right, so it gives you
It helps. It simplifies it for you because we're not counsellors, but all of a sudden we have to be. We're thrown into a situation that we have to be a counsellor. We have to deal with mental illness, all stuff that, you know, we're not equipped with. We're mothers or partners or siblings or...
So it sounds like the animal metaphors and the book were the most important things that helped you or most useful.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that was...
No, I still use the book. I think the book is fantastic.
Okay.
And, you know, there were lots of quotes in the book about... and I remember a passage in the book about when one person was talking about how when they started to recover, all their emotions started coming to the surface. And they started crying and they were overloaded. And I actually used that when my daughter got to that point, and she said, "Oh my God, I can't cope with all these feelings I haven't felt for years." And I actually got the book out and let her read that page.
Okay.
And she said, "Okay, that's given me permission. I understand that now. I'm all good."
Right. Okay. Yeah. So not just the book being useful for you, but also for your daughter in that context.
In certain stages in her recovery, absolutely.
Great. Holly, does this resonate with your observations?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just in the group last night with Ross, and I think the carers' capacity for self-reflection and catching themselves in that moment, I'm an ostrich, I'm being an ostrich, I'm being the rhino, and this isn't working. I know this kind of doesn't really work. I'm automatically going into it, but then thinking, yeah, okay, I'm going to channel, I'm going to try something else here, see how it goes, and you find out pretty quickly if it works or not. Yeah, absolutely.
So as a facilitator, have you observed the carers coming back and using the metaphors in different ways?
Yeah, they come in and they'll say, you know, I was an ostrich during the week and I found myself in that situation. I decided to, you know, kind of, this is a partner of somebody, and he said, I averted it to my partner. I can feel myself doing this. How about we talk about it instead? So they're actually identifying it and shifting it just within themselves, or they'll catch themselves doing it within the group as they start to talk through exercises. I'm trying to fix it, aren't I?
Okay. So catching themselves, that's an interesting terminology, isn't it? So greater awareness from their point of view. And what else do you observe as being useful for carers in the CCSW context?
Yeah, so as we said, definitely the animal metaphors, but I suppose as well it's giving So the self-reflection is one, and the first part, it's pretty hard to do anything else without sort of establishing that first, and then helping them develop the skills, say with the motivational interviewing, just other ways of communicating that will help them get underneath the eating disorder, see past or around the eating disorder. Being able to externalise the eating disorder is another really, really important one that I think definitely changes the dynamics of communication at home, so they can kind of hear when the eating disorder is sort of talking to them, and maybe, like you said, Tracy, you know, I can't have this conversation with you now, you know, I can really hear the eating disorder really strong right now. So it's just a nicer way, a warmer way of communicating. So it's, yeah.
And is there a sense that relationships are enhanced as a result of those additional resources?
I guess with that, the different ways of learning how to communicate differently, the communication sort of changes, and sometimes it's quite, as Ross or Geneviève was saying, it's quite obvious to the young person. They go, hang on, this isn't, you're not being my dad, or this is not what you normally do. You're not the usual rhino that I'm, you know, kind of been used to you sort of doing. So I've had the quite unique perspective of, I've been seeing a 19-year-old for individual therapy, and her parents attended the group that Ross and Geneviève ran that I sort of watched, and that was kind of my part of that learning process. So I had to have a very overt conversation with the individual that I see, as well as the parents that I'll be in this group. And but it's been really interesting to then be able to see as a clinician, and I hear this through the other members of the team talking about, you know, how the carers have shifted within the treatment of the other individuals within the service, but have been able to see just within this family how much the communication has changed and how much it's probably complementing the cognitive analytic therapy that I'm doing. Yeah. Obviously, we might have different kind of ways of working with the other different therapies, but certainly has enhanced the communication. And the parents and this young woman would have all said that it's completely changed their relationship.
Yeah. That's a unique experience.
So
your experience, Tracy, in terms of your relationship changing?
It does, and it really helps the family dynamics, you know, because, you know, I had two younger siblings and a husband and a business to run and, you know, a million different things, and it was becoming a battlefield. It was getting to the point, you know, I'd drive home and think, I don't want to go home tonight, I can't do this, where it just, instead of going in and being the rhinoceros and you know, charging in, it just changed our whole family dynamics. I'd start talking about, you know, I'd say to Veronica, she'd be in the kitchen, she'd say, what are you putting in there, I'd say, take your anorexia out of my kitchen, please.
Right.
Take it out. Yeah. And they'd laugh. You know, so all of a sudden the eating disorder became, it's part of our family, you know, but they could have a laugh at things, and it just changed the whole dynamics of our family.
So the way you talked about
the kids got along better, the three of them. My husband coped a lot better with my daughter, and it made a huge difference. And she felt that she wasn't ruining the family anymore. She felt that we could see her as an individual and her eating disorder as separate, and it helped her.
And so she could observe the influence of the new way that you were relating, and that was changing the family dynamics and the family relationship, and was helping her. I'm just curious to also know, you were learning the CCSW skills. What about other members of your family? Did they notice that you were changing your approach?
Yeah, they did. My son came up and said, wow, you're handling things differently now. But I think they subtly picked up a few things as well. They started dealing with her differently. So before, my son wouldn't have anything to do with her. He saw her as an eating disorder. He didn't understand it. He didn't want anything to do with it. But all of a sudden, he'd start communicating with her the way I was, and their relationship changed. So they're quite close now.
So things do change in that context.
And probably that modelling.
It's the whole family dynamic. They don't want to be in a dysfunctional family. They wanted a normal family life, and by using it, we achieved that again.
Okay, great. So I just want to go back to a clinician's experience of learning CCSW. What has been your experience of learning the package and the skills involved as a facilitator? And then also, what have you learned as a clinical sort of leader about setting it up in your service system?
Okay, well, I'd probably say that I'm kind of still learning it in some ways, in terms of the now co-facilitating. But in a lot of ways, they're very, in terms of the skills and the things that are being taught, they're very familiar. So motivational interviewing, it's very, you can't, help people with eating disorders without using motivational interviewing skills. So I guess the content was quite familiar. So it's about then how it's, those learning how do you engage individuals within the group, the carers within the group in thinking about and using those skills and drawing out from them, their experiences and how they might be able to, and I suppose in a lot of ways, probably using those motivational interviewing techniques yourself within the group, because some carers are very aware that they're a rhino or whatever, and others might need to think about things in different ways. So
so part of the facilitation is sort of displaying motivational skills yourself as a facilitator to the group in that context, as a way of handing that over to them in their own family context.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what have you noticed? Because I mentioned before that you have conversations with the other therapists about the carer support group. So how does that work, and what do you notice about other clinicians who have got carers of their clients in the group? What impact it has on them?
Yeah, again, it's certainly increased the self-reflection of those carers, so they're able to identify where they might be entering into quite unhelpful sort of automatic responses or patterns, or particularly the accommodating and enabling the eating disorder. That very much is something that becomes quite noticeable, that clinicians will talk about, that different carers are shifting different things that they're doing. And I guess, within the different treatment models, it obviously has different effects. So say for a family that's doing the family-based treatment, they might, hang on to more of the externalising and the accommodating enabling really shifts. Whereas, as I said, the young person that I'm seeing, it's been more around the communication and the family's communication style and the motivational interviewing and things like that. So depending, I think I'm hearing kind of slightly different, whether or not results, looking at Geneviève, kind of even might that might not, but just anecdotally, I think it depends. I think it depends on the different treatment model that the family are engaged in as well. They're also probably the things that they really also pull out of the sessions.
So what they're doing individually, whether as an individual or as a family in your 0 to 25 program. That is complemented. They're sort of picking things out to complement that particular approach. Yeah, absolutely. But there's,
within all of those skills, I will hear examples of them all the time within clinicians talking to me about, this family that are coming, they've been, parents have sort of shifted, they're doing this a bit differently now, or they've said this from the group that they've learnt from the group. So they're certainly talking about it, and it's become more of a shared language within the service as well. Yeah.
Right, and just in terms, because I know you've had some struggles with recruitment over time, and I think
we did initially.
So what have you done to change that, and how have you got around that particular dilemma?
So I think so we had a family support worker who supported with Pathways, who was sort of initially kind of organising the groups, and that was in conjunction with EDV, and we sort of. Because we were sort of mainly doing it within Barwon Health and the Geelong Clinic, which is the private inpatient and day program facility that's also in Geelong that we work very closely with. So there sort of seemed to be a bit of a drop-off in the numbers. So we sort of we regenerated it, and we cut the cost. So we've made it no cost. Obviously, they can be part of the research project. We opened it up quite wide to the community, as in I put it out to all the mental health teams and our carer support people at Barwon Health, very much integrating it within. As soon as a family will come in for an assessment, we talk about it. It's sort of part and parcel of what we offer. And we talk about it in a really positive way, and we're might kind of think about down the track using or involving carers more in maybe talking to other carers about the group as a way of sort of also inviting them. But we've had no problem filling the last couple of groups. We have a waiting list each time now. And that's, again, as I said, it's catching them at the assessment time. I think the community becoming a bit more aware of that it's available. We had, which you were involved in, Martin, the seminar forum where we, had a big night about, eating disorders, what helps, and obviously family involvement was a big key feature of that. So I think that also reached out to the Barwon, Geelong and surrounding regions community about that we offer the group. I've filled the group with the next day at 9 o'clock. I had 5 spots remaining, I think, and it was filled, and there was then a waiting list. So
it was quite a powerful event, really, because there was 170 people there, and I recall a family at that event. It was sort of at that time we were asking for questions from the audience, 170 people, and there was a sense of silence, but then one family, the mother spoke and said, I'll start. And she made the comment around the fact that she had lost her son through the life of the eating disorder, but she was thanking everyone for being there, because it felt like for her the fact that there were so many people were there was an act of solidarity, and it was an act of support for her that she wasn't alone in that context. So it got me reflecting around the usefulness of having carer support group, because there is that sense of a shared humanity where people come together and share their experiences together, and that creates a strong bond. I'm sure you've experienced that.
Isolated. It takes a long time to find. Well, I know it's probably easier now to find, but 10 years ago there was nowhere a carer could go. You felt like you were the only person there. You had to do it on your own. There were there were very few support groups. EDV was even a bit sort of, they had support groups, but they were fledgling sort of stuff. There was nowhere to go. It's becoming, the more you advertise it, the more people will come to it, because we desperately want to help, and we actually feel we're an integral part of it, because we're there 24/7. And we need help. We needed help. We need help in dealing with it. And
So what would be your advice as a carer to services that are trying to get CCSW happening? What would be the things that you think they need to keep in mind in terms of recruiting, getting carers there?
You need to let them know it's out there. You need to let them know that it's really going to help. I think sometimes even just getting someone who's been through it in the initial stages of getting it going to say, you know what, I've done this, I can do it, you can do it, it's fantastic. But they also need to then offer, I think, support afterwards. Like, I did the telephone counselling, and there are times now I think, oh geez, I just wish I could do another day to refresh. Because you talk about motivational interviewing and things. Well, to me that's foreign. It's not my expertise, and I've done it, but I'm not comfortable with it. I've never been comfortable with it, but it's a skill that if you would offer once a year or once every 6 months, come along, let's refresh, do a refresher.
I think you're right.
It would really help and keep us going, because now there are times I look back even now and I think, oh, hang on. We've been going on like this for about 6 weeks. Oh, hang on. I need to change something. I'm getting caught up in this again.
You're not in there, Holly. You
can we certainly think about that.
You need it.
Yeah, because we have a family support worker position that's very much complementary, and she's in the audience. It's very much what we sort of plan on doing. We've sort of had to re-energise the position and shift it around a bit, is support carers into the group and then support them out. So continuing to refresh, enhance, talk about, support the skills that are learnt. We also try to link them in. There's another carers group in Geelong run by One Care, and EDV are also involved in that as well. So we also try to then talk to parents about continuing in that group afterwards if they want to maintain those connections. Because you're right, that's the other such important part, and even though it's not a support group, it happens naturally when people are talking about their experience, that they automatically feel connections and, oh, I'm not alone, and and they connect, in the breaks and afterwards.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And then it's not even that, you start getting people hear about, oh, you've got a daughter with an eating disorder. You start getting phone calls and how can you help me do this and how can you, and you think, oh.
Breaking down.
It's powerful. It works.
Yes,
it really
no,
works. It's powerful, and carers really need. I think it will help programs and people who are dealing with people with eating disorders, if they've got the support and the carers helping them from a different side, it'll make their job easier.
So thanks very much for sharing your perspectives. It's kind of, for me, it's always an interesting experience to have carers and workers talking together as opposed to being on opposite sides and not integrating because we've all got the same interest. And so thanks for sharing that, and very much appreciate you giving your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the idea is to try and give a space to get a carer's perspective, but also a worker's perspective on the influence that CCSW has had on your respective lives and professions and personal life. So as a way of introduction, if we could just have you briefly introduce your context, and then we'll sort of move into talking more about your specific experiences. Tracy?
Hi, I'm Tracy. I've been a carer of my daughter has anorexia.
So I'm going to hand over. Martin's going to be doing an interview and in a way to kind of hear about what it's like from both these perspectives. And we'll do this for about 20 minutes or so. So we'll just run that straight through and maybe some questions there in the audience, but Martin will do that now. Okay? Great. I'll hand over to you, Martin.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Holly and Tracy, for being part of this interview. I guess if we can try and be as comfortable as possibly can, but just imagine we're having, a cuppa in the backyard somewhere and sort of not big focused on what's arising. It feels like a tree branch and so forth, but slightly different to the carers that we've heard today in the context that you've learnt that through a telephone coaching training program with Ross, as we've talked about before. And so your sort of story around using that knowledge in your own context with your daughter. So what was the context of your carer life when you got introduced to CCSW?
Before I got introduced to it, it was difficult. There was nothing for carers. You had to kind of, I felt and has had anorexia for probably 10 years. So.
And how old is she?
She's 23.
She's 23. Oh, okay, thank you. Holly?
So I'm Holly Laver. I'm the Clinical Coordinator of Barwon Health Eating Disorder Service, and I've more recently been working with Ross and Geneviève around the CCSW groups within Barwon Health, and also have started co-facilitating a group myself with Ross.
And when you say clinical coordinator, what's your service system there at Barwon?
So we have a specialist eating disorder service. It's an outpatient service that provides assessment and treatment for people of all ages, but we specifically have a youth sort of early intervention youth model. So we offer various psychological therapies, CBTE, cognitive analytic therapy, as well as family-based treatment. And as part of that, we have obviously the Building Hope and a family support worker through Pathways to support families.
Okay, great. Thanks, Holly. So Tracy, just to sort of start with your story in terms of as a carer, and acknowledging that your introduction to CCSW is